Well, welcome back to the Ministry Without Hating It podcast, brought to you in partnership with Odyssey Haven Coaching and Counseling, dedicated to the pursuit of answering the question, is it possible to do ministry without hating it? We have a theory, it just might be. I am Chad Garrison, and normally at this point, I would kick it over to my partner, Brenton Hill. But as we were recording this interview with our guest today, he lost power and internet, all within the same fell swoop. So super fun there. So he is here, kind of. You'll hear some of him in the interview, but also not. So we can't riff, unfortunately. Hey, so just to kind of set up this episode for you guys that are listening. So for today's episode, we get to have a conversation with our mutual friend, Jim McGuire. Jim has served as a hospice chaplain for 20 plus years. And when we were creating our season 1 guest list, Jim's was a ministry perspective that we knew that we wanted to have. And so there's a lot that goes into the ministry of chaplaincy, and especially so in hospice chaplaincy, that, as you will hear from Jim, can be really applied to your ministry, even if it doesn't involve this type of ministry. And I think you're really going to find just his approach, and even just how God has used his, what maybe even some people would see as ministry failures, to shape and really get him to a spot of where he's at now. It's just quite a thing. And so really excited for you guys to hear today's conversation. Let me give you just a little bit of a bio for Jim. Reverend Jim McGuire serves as a hospice chaplain at Lightways Hospice and Serious Illness Care in Joliet, Illinois. Jim graduated from Mount Vernon Bible College, Ohio in 1987 with a BA in Theology, and from Lincoln Christian University in Illinois in 1998 with an MA in New Testament. During his 22 years of hospice chaplaincy, he has visited and ministered to well over 5,000 individuals who have faced terminal diagnosis. As an extension of his chaplaincy work, Jim has officiated hundreds of funerals, services, and with always the goal to provide comfort and hope. Throughout his 35 years as a licensed and ordained Foursquare minister, he has served several congregations in a variety of responsibilities, including youth pastor, associate pastor, senior interim, and church planner. Additionally, Jim has previously served on the National Hospice Coordinator for Foursquare Chaplains International, FCI, as well as numerous state and regional ministry assignments. Jim has chaplain ecclesiastical endorsement through FCI, and he continues to speak to civic groups and churches. In 2019, Jim released his book, Stay, The 4 Pillars of Living Life and Finishing Well, and in 2021, he released the same book in the Spanish language with the hope of reaching an often and under-resourced population. We hope that you enjoy our conversation with Jim McGuire. Well, Jim McGuire, it is our great privilege to welcome you to the Ministry Without Hating It podcast. Thanks for being here with us today.
Honored to be with you and Brenton. I've been looking forward to our time together.
Me too.
Yeah.
So we'd like to start off, as you've probably heard with some of the other interviews and conversations we've had, but just to kind of help us give a framework and even really maybe a baseline as we start off. But what does the word ministry mean to you?
Probably when we were in college, Bible college, I remember someone saying that, ministry is as simple as finding a need and meeting it. And I thought, okay, find a need and meet it. And so that's really been really the definition I've leaned upon throughout, our years of ministry. So just find something that needs to be done. And if it's mine to do, then to do it. That's really ministry.
Okay. I love the simplicity of that. And you kind of already alluded to some of this within just even your definition, but how has your own journey, whether it's in ministry or even personally, how has it shaped your definition, as you've just said, of ministry?
Yeah, thanks for that question. When I think of that question, I think of the time when we moved to New Lenox. We live in New Lenox, Illinois, which is about 35 miles southwest of downtown Chicago. And before we moved here to do a church plant, that's why we moved to the area here. That was one of the reasons why we came to this town. I was reading about the story of Abraham. Abram, and God said to Abram he was going to give him the land of promise, and he said, go walk the length and the breadth of the land. So we moved here in August, but the previous March, I was driving through the area, and I decided I was going to stop in the afternoon and walk this community north to south and east to west. And I can still remember it was a cold, of course, it was a cold day. It was a little rainy, but this is the time I had. And as I got out of my car and started walking north and then east and then south and then west, I just sensed in my spirit that the small, still voice of the Lord speaks something to me in each direction that I walked. And I remember as I was finishing my walk, I was walking west in the town of New Lenox, and I sensed in my spirit the Lord say to me, do not define ministry for me. I will define ministry for you.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't fully understand what that sense in my spirit was, but really it was for me permission, and really the Lord telling me, you're moving to this area. You're going to come into do a church plant work, but I want you to know that I don't want you to tell me what ministry is. That if you will remain available to me and to my Spirit's leading, I'll show you. I'll lead you into ministry. And I tell you, that was such a freeing, liberating moment for me. And looking back over the past 24 years, that sense in my spirit has meant so much to not only myself, but to my wife, Kim. And we came, our prayer was that, Lord, you'd help us to impact our region. While we came to plant a church and hopefully establish that church, by the way, we worked it for about 9 or 10 years. We finally closed it in 2008, having moved here in 1998. But we look at our lives and we see the places where the Lord has allowed us to be used in this region. And it's really been quite profound and quite humbling. We're delighted that we simply say, okay, God, how do you want to use us? We're here, we're available. And he's been very, very gracious to us to guide us day by day.
Wow, I love that. And I want to thank you for even just even some of your transparency within the church planning, because I know the expectation. We were talking a little bit before we jumped on, the expectations that we set for ourselves, as pastors and leaders, and are they actually the expectations of the Lord, and or are they the weights that we have put on? And for you to say, I just thought that was so profound when you said God told you, no, I defined what the ministry is, not you.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. So how has that played out then, to where you even find yourself now?
So, of course, in church plant work, it required us to become bivocational. And so, where the previous 12 or 13 years, I had worked full time for a local church. We were accustomed to, that was kind of our main deal. But when we moved to New Lenox, it required I find work outside the church because there was no established church at that time. And I didn't know that I'd find myself working for a local hospice. And I heard of a situation where there was a chaplaincy that might be open. I went and inquired and put my resume in, had a conversation with the then CEO, and I started part-time. We had 3 little children. We had a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-month-old when we moved here. And my wife was not working at the time. And so that was part of it. But I started at the hospice, and I remember, we all do it, driving down the road, or, you whisper a little prayer just between you and God. And I remember after I accepted the job at hospice on a part-time situation, I said, God, thank you for this job. But I'm only going to be here for about a year. I have other plans. The plans is to get this church established and up and running. And that was my thinking. That was my, my formation. And God doesn't laugh at us, but sometimes I think, when we tell him our plans, I think he could chuckle a little bit. And so this week, I just started my 23rd year as a hospice chaplain. And like I said, we worked the church for almost 10 years, and in 2008 we closed it. And it takes a lot of faith. I always said it takes a lot of faith to plant a church. It takes a whole lot more faith to close the church or to close the work. And but God was with us in that, and that's all part of God's plan and purpose. And looking back now, I could not imagine my life or ministry to be any richer had it not been for our work in hospice. And my wife went back. Kim's went back as a school teacher, a reading specialist. Now she's a principal at a school and has influenced really thousands of children there and the thousands of people I've had the opportunity to meet through hospice. And so it all started with Kim and I saying, okay, God, we're here, we're available. How do you want to use us? And if we won't define it for you, you define it for us.
Wow. So I'm glad that's actually a really great segue because, hospice chaplaincy, I personally believe is a gift. It's just not something that comes natural to me to be in those spaces. And we can talk a little bit more about that because I definitely, some of these questions are asking for a friend. I'd like some advice actually, but
Yeah.
I'm curious because you had said, especially that it takes a lot of faith to open a church. It takes even more to close one. And so within that transition, obviously you felt like God was transitioning you and your family out of that type of ministry and definitely into different type of ministry within the chaplaincy. How did you recognize that you wanted or that you were supposed to do that type of ministry and hospice chaplaincy for even longer and long term?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question. Well, when you're raising kids, you have to make a rent. You have to buy the groceries, and that's what was providing that at the time. I didn't plan on being at a hospice long term. In fact, there are many times I said, God, I'm ready to do something else. I'm ready to, back in congregational ministry. But I made this decision when I started at hospice. I made the decision that I'm going to pastor this organization the way I would pastor a congregation. So even though I'm a chaplain to the person who's dying and I support their families as available pastoral care if they so choose, I decided I was going to pastor our agency. This is my congregation. And that included our staff, that included any of their family members. And I can tell you, I look back now and you say, I've had opportunity not only to officiate some of the weddings of our staff members, but I've had opportunity to officiate at the funerals of some of our staff members. I've officiated some of our staff members, their funerals, baby dedications. But again, I just made the decision, hospice is my congregation. Whatever that involves, this is my congregation. And I have that shepherd heart to pastor them. And we can do that whether we work at the local Walmart or wherever, if we just make a decision, God, this is my assignment right now.
Wow.
It's not a forever assignment. Yeah. It's my temporary assignment. I need to steward where I'm at right now, what you've given to me. So
ooh. That's absolutely. Absolutely. So it sounds like it was out of obedience and that the Lord just continued to bless and be fruitful and multiply within that.
Yeah. And again, there are many times I said, Lord, there's something else. There's got to be something else. But again, I say, I'm yours, God. I'm yours. And I take it day by day. I kid my coworkers. I take it day by day. I always go to work as though this could be my last day of work. Not because I'm going to die, but because they may say, look, Jim, we're finished with your services here. Or I may decide to do something different. And you know what? I've done it day by day now for over 22 years and it's worked. So it's a day by day relationship I have with it.
Can you just, I don't want to leave this hanging, and I definitely have a lot of questions, which but could you just go back to that space of when you guys had determined, and maybe speaking to church planners, maybe specifically, because I know that pain and that high of high as well, but knowing that you said in 2008 that it was time to close, there's time to transition. Can you just walk us through, if you can, where you guys felt and where that began, or even how you knew in your heart that this is what God was saying, even though this could feel like failure, but it's most definitely not, because you can even now in hindsight look back and go, this is what God was preparing us for, and it was the faith to walk that out. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, my wife, Kim's much better. She cuts through the stuff a lot quicker than I do. It takes me longer to come to the realization. I think just the way her mind works, I think she has sense that we were to close it sooner than we did, but we were trying to be as fair as we could to it and as patient as we could with the work. No one ever worked harder than my wife and I during that 10-year period. And we did more outreach and more, we did more things that we thought were the right things to do. And yet we had a family, we lose a family. We had another, we lose a family. And you could never get over that threshold. And we simply said to the group of people who were with us, look, we've been doing this a long time, and we can continue to do this, on to infinity. But let's just give this another year and see where it goes. And that's what we did. We gave it one more year. And at the end of the year, we said, okay, here it is. And everyone had an idea that, okay. And so we were able to release everyone. It was fun to, we had them, what a beautiful group. And we weren't big. We were 25 or 30 of us, but wonderful, wonderful group that we did so many good things. But to see them then released to other places and other congregations, and to see them go in and make really an impact in those areas of ministry. And I still marvel at the work that we even do with, not just in congregations, but within the community, how we're still serving in various parts. And so, that's a challenging time, but ministry is a day by day walking with God and listening for His Spirit. So someone is walking it out right now. They're trying to figure out for themselves as their current assignment. And, but the Spirit's there. The Spirit will lead and He will confirm. That's the Spirit's business. So.
That's good. That's good. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that will be helpful and maybe even hopeful for some that maybe feel like there is none right now where they're at. So
yeah, and again, our thinking was when we came here, we're coming to do a church plant, but our vision was so much broader than that. We're coming to impact the region, and we have to remember that as ministers, we're called to a congregation, yes, but we're really called to the region in which God places us, and if we'll have that perspective. I don't see that in Scripture. The disappointments in Scripture. Boy, you read enough, you say, boy, you may think that was a disappointment, but that was God's appointment for that moment in time, and He was leading during that time. So
yeah. Kind of turning back to the hospice stuff, and really just your experience, and we're going to get certainly to that. So for me, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit here, but in prepping for this interview for you, I was actually trying to pinpoint, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, why hospital visits or even end of life care really, and honestly, sometimes even funerals for me are so hard. And my first thought was, well, it's just because it's uncomfortable. Like I just don't love the uncomfortable in between, the pain, especially circumstantially, whatever has happened. But when I thought a little bit deeper about it, I think really it's more about my personality and how I'm wired relationally, in that I have a tendency to take on the burdens of others, really as my own. And so with that preface, in your years of experience, what wisdom would you pass along to me, or maybe to others whose ministry involves this type of ministering to others?
Yeah, if you'll talk to someone in healthcare, and I'm just going to pick on healthcare workers. If you'll talk to someone in healthcare and ask them, how did you find yourself in healthcare? What was it early in your life, or some of the things that happened in your life? You will almost hear of a story of someone whose either mother or their grandmother was a caregiver who took care of a person, and they learned it as a child. They learned it by watching, a parent or a grandparent take care of someone, or maybe their grandmother lived with them, when they were children, and they learned to be a nurturing, caring person. And God uses those experiences early in our formation to get us to where we are at as adults. But again, I almost without question, there's always a story, a backstory. How we find ourselves in pastoral ministry, there's always a backstory there. And for me, that's really the most intriguing part is, what's your backstory? Tell me about your backstory. Tell me about how you got to this place in life, because we just don't show up one day. We all have a path that we're on, and God is a shepherd is leading us. So Yeah, there are challenges. There are challenges in chaplaincy. I could not see myself as being a hospital chaplain. I could do every floor in the hospital except for the emergency room where there's trauma. And I know myself well enough that I don't like walking into trauma situations. We have a pediatric hospice, that we take care of our children. We take care of the children, and I have been assigned, a pediatric, a child from time to time over the past 22 years. But I can tell you this: I've gone to visit the children in the hospital or the home, and I'm bawling, crying, and the parents are comforting me. I'm like, this isn't good. So I try to steer away from that. We have other chaplains who take care of the children, because I would just see my child there. That could be my child in that bed right now. And why isn't it my child? Why is it this family going through that? So those are things that you just learn. There's certain things I could not be a paramedic. I couldn't go into a crash accident, and begin to. I just know I'm not wired that way. Thank God, when the alarm goes off, those men and women, they take off, and they're there, take care of those people. So we all have our giftings, our callings, and we stay within that. And I don't pretend to be something that I'm not. So.
Yeah. Well, that's that's actually kind of freeing for me, just to be honest with you, because I have a tendency to look at those and like we have. So when it comes to even pastoral care, I have another pastor, lay pastor, who it is clearly his gifting, and actually he actually gets energized by that. And I think of some of the situations that he stepped in, it really helps support, my weaknesses, just to be honest in that. But I also have a tendency to go, why can't I should be able to do that. Right. But you're saying, no, it's okay to know your limits.
It is. I would caution, though, especially for our pastors, that if that's the way you're wired, but when your parishioner, when your congregant is in a delicate situation, that they know that their shepherd still loves them and is with them and is journeying with them. I can tell you in my chaplaincy that I cannot tell you the number of conversations I've had with people through the years who have said, my pastor was nowhere to be found. We needed him or we needed her, and he never comes to see me. She never comes to see me, and so I don't give a pass to our shepherds, our pastors.
Yeah.
You still have to be there. But you can also say, I don't need to see the scar. I don't need to see the incision. You can keep, and I told families that I don't need to see the incision. I don't need to see the stitches. You can keep it covered. That's for the nurse. Nurses
That's
like
right.
seeing those sorts of things. I don't want to see that. And families understand it. So maybe with your your staff member there, that person helps you in an area that you feel is real strong. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and thank you for saying that, because I definitely don't use it as an excuse to not show up. I have also learned that some of the greatest ministry that I've been able to actually undertake is actually being there in the hard space. And I think maybe for me, and this may be something you could speak to, I have a tendency to maybe overthink it or think that I've got to have the right thing to say and that kind of thing. And one of the things that I have learned is just being present is usually enough. And would you maybe speak to that, or even some other kind of mindsets when it comes into going into those spaces, the painful places or the grieving spaces with people that ministry leaders should really keep the focus of as they go into that?
Yeah. So again, you're absolutely right. As far as, we feel like we have to bring something to that we have to say something, that we have to, and I've just learned through the years that I walk into the situations. They're the most stressful situations in the family life. I do that every day. So I'm always walking I'm always walking into them on their worst day. They're not at their strength. They're at their absolute weakness, and the family is as vulnerable as can be. Am I to think that somehow I'm going to say something magical that's going to make all of that go away? And so I've just determined a long time ago, I don't have what they need.
Yeah.
I cannot provide what they need. That's the Spirit's work. I can be available and I can be present with them. And if need be, I can share something with them, but I don't have to. And in fact, there are occasions in which I will attend to death where someone has just died and the body is there and the family is there. And I can talk a lot, but at that moment, I tend to say very little because they don't need to hear from me necessarily. If there's something that I need to say that's in that moment, it's sensitive and relevant. And as a minister, we do speak life. If we can offer, a scripture or a prayer, absolutely. But I never force it. I never force a scripture. I never force a prayer. I'm available. And sometimes when it's forced, it's an awkward moment for everybody. And so I just remain available and say, God, I'm here. And if you need me to speak, I will. But I can show God's love without words. I can demonstrate his concern without having to be a mouthpiece. I really can.
Yeah.
And so I've learned that through the years. I've learned that. So.
That's good. That's good. So you were talking about before, and I'm going to preface this by saying, so in the middle of this interview, that Brenton's power has gone out, and so we lost him. And you were just talking about how this is your work. You just kind of always got to be flexible. Can you speak more to that and maybe how that translates to ministry, period, just as you have defined it and have been talking about it?
Yeah, we like to structure things. We like to plan things and organize things and kind of move them along. But I part of my formation is I read through the scripture, Old and New Testament. Boy, I see so much that occurs that was unplanned, unscheduled. And you say, wow, where did that come from? I mean, again, pick a book and pick a story. And there are some degrees of things didn't happen the way they thought they were going to happen. I mean, Peter's up praying and all of a sudden he sees this vision and God says, take and eat. And Peter said, no, I've never, and I'm not going to. And then he says, oh, by the way, Cornelius is coming, this stranger's coming, and I want you to go to his house. You a Jew, go to this Gentile's house. And there in the book of Acts, we see really a very critical moment in the life of the church, a watershed moment. And I think the church is still dealing with that moment that Peter had with Cornelius about what is acceptable, what's not acceptable, what is our approach when we're faced with situations that we feel uncomfortable with. One thing about chaplaincy, it's true in pastoral ministry too. There are times I have to put my theology on the shelf, meaning my perspective of who God is and how he works. And I have to be comfortable with that. Because if I'm not comfortable with it, like Peter there in Acts, he had to put his theology on the shelf. I'm a Jew and I don't need those things. And no, I don't go in the home of a Gentile. And yet, had he said no to God, he would have missed a really important moment for the church. And so there are times in our lives and within our local congregations where I'm not saying you violate your theology, but if we're going to be Christ to this community, to our culture, and boy, we have a very diverse culture that is changing by the month. Yeah. It's different than it was 10 years ago, the culture in which we're living in. And I see no sign that it's going to slow down. So we have to ask ourselves as Christ's representative here on earth, what are we going to do with all these changes? Are we going to get into our bunkers and say, no, we're not going out there because it's dangerous and I don't like what they're saying and what they're doing? Or can we, like Christ, he walked the streets and he met those who were in dire situations. And even when the disciples says, Jesus, what are you doing talking to this woman? What are you doing with this sinner? In that moment, Jesus was able to be with them. And that's a challenge for all of us. Now, we can pick our theology back up again and put it in our pocket, and if it makes us feel, comfortable, as it does. But there are times that we just have to put those things on a shelf and say, okay, God, for this moment, I don't feel comfortable, but I'm going to be available to you. And that's, I've learned to be comfortable with those moments of saying, boy, I'm not comfortable with this, Lord, but you're here and I'm here. And so use me if you want to. So
that's Man, okay, so I'm just kind of pulling back because I think it keeps going back to what you said, and I'm really even hearing you living out in obedience what God said. Just let me be the one to define what ministry is, um, and I just, yeah, it's really interesting because actually, so I'm reading this book right now called "Leading with a Limp" by Dan Allender. And one of the things that I just heard this morning that he said is that we have to learn how to dance with the chaos, not try to control it, but actually move with it. And when you're speaking there with, kind of goes back to even answering my earlier question of, God, I know this is uncomfortable. This is not what I would prefer to be, but you're in it with me, and this is what you're calling me to. So I have to set my preferences, my personality even, or my way of wanting to have things go and control, and just be present and just be there. And that, Jim, that's great. Thank you so much for that. I'm getting freedom even by talking to you.
Good, good. Well, that's what it's all about. I mean, that's where the Lord leads us. So yeah, thank you for that, Jim.
Absolutely. I want to, if you don't mind, I want to shift and ask you a few questions about your book, Stay. Can we? Are you good with that? Yeah. Sure. So for those not familiar, the book's titled, it's titled, Stay, 4 Pillars for Living Life and Finishing Well. And just to kind of give kind of the synopsis, and I'll let you talk here in just a second too. You write in there, it's stuff wisdom that you have learned from caring for thousands of individuals in hospice care before their passing. One of the things I love about the book is that it's full of personal and honestly fascinating stories and interactions from your many years in hospice care. And so I'm curious about your process of actually curating all of those stories, and really what your approach was to pulling out the shared lessons that you've really gleaned from those interactions and those stories.
Yeah, so it was a process of several years. In fact, Kim, my wife, had said for several years, she says, you ought to write a book about your experiences at hospice. I said, you have so many unique stories. And I would say to her, I said, there are so many books that have been written. I said, if I had something to say, I would write. And, but, I just thought about that through the years. And I began to think about the people I met and the lessons they have taught me. And I thought, okay, maybe I can write a book on some of the people I've met. Of course, with the HIPAA laws, I changed the names and some of the circumstances to protect their identity, of course. But I just began to think about some of the people I learned, some of the people I met, and the lessons that I learned. And I really started out with, I was going to do 10 lessons I've learned. So I thought, well, I can do 10 chapters and 10 lessons. And I thought, no, that's too many. I'll do 7 lessons, 7 main lessons I've learned, and I'll do 7 chapters. And I started writing, I thought, this is still too many. I thought, what are 4 main lessons I've learned? And what can, really the premise is, the lessons for living taught to us by the dying. And so I just began to take their story. And our youngest had just finished high school, so I wasn't going to sports games and all those, the schedule that we had. And it was the first winter I thought, well, I have time now. And so I sat down with my iPad at my kitchen table and just began to type some of the memories I had of the people I had met, changing their names, of course. And that's really how it took. And I didn't write all through the year. I would take the summer off because summers are busy and I could be out. And then I pick it back up when the cold weather came back around here in Northern Illinois. And so it took me about 3 or 3.5 years to finish the book. And really what was the motivator, the end motivator for me was after about 3 years of writing, I had about 40,000 words or better. So it's not a long book. It's an easy read. It's a quick read.
Yeah.
Sharing the stories of people I met. But I read somewhere online about this. A man said that no one cares about the book you never finished.
Mm.
No one cares about the book you never finished. And so I had all these words, I had all these ideas, and it was like a kick in the pants. And I said, Jim, okay, you need to either do something with this or stop thinking about it. And so that motivated me to hire an editor to do some work for me and really clean it up, make it much more readable and structured. And that took about another 6 months. And then we self-published on Amazon. So it's been a wonderful tool. It's just a tool. Mm-hmm. I finished it when I wrote it in English. My goal was always to have it in Spanish, the Spanish language. And so last year we were able to also get a translator to translate it. And then we had an editor who was able to edit it. And then we also published it in the Spanish language. And, my wife Kim would tease me. She says, this is not a very profitable endeavor that you've had here. I said, well, you're my accountant, honey. But like ministry, I didn't write the book to make money off it. I mean, you give your life to the Lord as an expression of what He's done for you. And while we've probably sold, in distribution, probably sold maybe 500 books. We've given away probably 5 times them. And so it's really, for me, I tell people it's more satisfying to give my book away than to sell it. And people say, really? I said, yeah, it really is. To be able to say, here's a gift. We want to invest in your life and your ministry. And hopefully, there's something in the pages of this book that may speak to you and help you on your journey. And that's really as simple as it gets for me. And it's a delight when someone says, hey, I read your book. And I'm like, wow, really? You really? Yeah. You spent 2 or 3 or 4 hours with me in my book? Yeah. And so that's really the great honor that people say, hey, I took some time to be with you. And so anyways, but thank you for asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I actually, you mentioned, you call them pillars in the book, the 4 pillars that you've got. And I'm going to say these and knowing that we could probably do 4 and maybe more podcasts on each one, and maybe we will. I don't know. This podcast is still very much in an evolution and flowing and finding out its space. And so we totally understand what you're talking about of just making a resource available and that kind of thing. But I'm wondering if you could help maybe pull out some of the key themes from each of them. So you've got listed, and you talk about stay. It's a different version of stay. So it's like stay focused, stay calm, which is one of my favorites, and I'll ask you something about that in just a second. Stay humble, and then stay true to yourself. So I'm not asking you to distill it all the way down to, hey, just give us the bite-sized Reader's Digest version. But what were some of the big things that you really felt like, obviously within these pillars, that I want to be able to pass along and share based on your experience with the hospice ministry?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I looked at all the people that I had visited, kind of took a broad view of all the people I had visited. And I thought about the lessons that are most important. And really, I chose these 4: stay focused, stay calm, stay humble, and stay true to yourself, because I saw these as 4 components of those who finished their life. Again, it's about living life and finishing well, whether you're finishing your life or finishing your job or finishing school, whatever. I saw these 4 things surface: the importance of staying focused in life. All the great accomplishments, most of the great accomplishments in life, whether on the world scene or national or in your life and my life, whether it's a degree program we finished, or athletic, or art, or band, it has required us to be focused at some point. And when you think about it, how the great cities were built, the great nations were established, the great things in your life and my life, it requires some focus. It requires some attention to the detail. And so I thought the ones who do well at the end of life, and I'm borrowing from my patients what they've taught me, the patients who do the best at the end of their life are the ones who are focused on the reality of what they're living. The families who do best, not only before their loved one dies, but also after the loved one, are the ones who are focused, who are aware of what's going on. They're people who do not deny the reality. I heard recently someone said, facts are our friends. And I can tell you, the people who deny the reality and live in this world that what's happening to them is not happening to them, they cause themselves more stress, and for their family members, it creates stress for them as well, that they can't have an open, honest conversation about where we are. You think about Scripture is filled with stories of people who die. And yet in the church, in the faith community, sometimes we have a very difficult time talking about transitions in life, especially that last transition. I mean, that's the hope. That's our hope, that we go home someday to be with God. I mean, and yet we have a tough time with this conversation. And just on a practical sense, I see it day by day with the people I see. Let's have an honest conversation. The person who has a difficult time is the person who meets me at the door and says, please don't talk to my husband or wife about, them being in hospice or that they're dying. It's like, okay, you've just hamstrung me. You've put, that's fine. We can talk about the weather if you want to. But really the ones who navigate that the best are the ones who are willing to talk about it. I have a funeral tomorrow for a gentleman who called me or I called him 8 weeks ago when he first came under our hospice care. My first conversation with him, we had never met. He said to me, "Will you do my funeral when I die?" I said, "Well, yeah, but why don't we meet first? You see if you like me and if you want me to do it." I said, "That's fine." And we met, and he says, "I want you to do my funeral for me." So, and that has helped his wife. That helped him. He took care of that detail. So staying focused, stay calm, of course, in my work. There's always reason to be upset. Again, it's the worst time in that family life. Some of the most difficult hours that they're facing. And if I go in there with this no calmness, or if there's no calmness in the home, that doesn't help. And so we look at that, and you're able to stay calm. You think about first responders. I highlighted them earlier. If a first responder shows up in an accident and they're all panicking, "Oh, what do we do? What do we do?" I'm not sure if I want that person working on me. The first responders are taught to stay calm. Pilots are taught to stay calm. Don't lose your thought process here. So, some of that comes through understanding your role. Clarify your expectations. And I highlight some of those things in the book. Sometimes you got to ask for help.
Yeah.
Sometimes we lose our calm because we don't ask for help. As pastors, ministers, we're doing it all of ourselves. And you wonder why you're frazzled and frustrated and tired. Well, you're doing all the work, Pastor. Share the load. We're in ministry to prepare those in ministry. We're not to do all the ministry. So stay calm, stay humble. Humility goes a long way in life. And sometimes that's a hard commodity to come by. But life will humble you. And if life doesn't, certainly the dying process will. And so stay humble with people. That's an important part. I remember my primary professor in seminary. He said that the most important context when reading through a text, the Bible text, is the context of humility. It's not the context of syntax or grammatical context or historical context. He says it's with you who is reading that text that you're humble when you go to that text. So humility is a great thing. And sometimes it's in short supply, and we need to just remind ourselves of that. And then finally, stay true to yourself. I am who I am. I'm not Chad. I'm not Brenton. I'm Jim. And be comfortable with who you are and what you bring to the table. And if you're following a super pastor that was at that church before you, then just keep applauding that guy or that woman. Say, yeah, they did a great job. I tell people I'm a one-trick pony. And, I'm not a multi-talented. I am who I am, and I'm comfortable with that. And I settle that question. A lot of people out there are much more talented than I am. I'm okay with that.
We've had another guest earlier on. Her name was Christina. Her name still is, Christina Hernandez. But she said something that we just keep even repeating around here, and that's we just want to be okay with our okayness. That is so well said. So thank you for breaking those down. We are going to make link available in the show notes to your book so people can see how you have unpacked all that in the stories, the really fascinating stories that you pulled within that. And I want to point out something that in preparation, I had never really thought of it this way, but kind of really jumped out at me the other day when I was looking at all these, and that when I was talking about the chapter on stay calm, really resonated with me because I was able to actually see how the other three pillars that you were talking about, how they really seem to kind of come at a connecting point within that stay calm. So when you think about having focus, but yet being humble and even self-aware of my own limitations or what I can do, it really does kind of bring you to this point of just keeping calm because I'm relaxed in knowing, number one, what God has sent me to do, but also my role within that. And it sounds like as you've kind of unpacked your ministry journey, even just a little bit here today, that has really been what has carried you and continues to carry you on as you step into these other circumstances. And even really, I believe, as you're talking and hearing how you and your wife just faithfully stepped in, are really impacting the region as you felt compelled and called to do in the beginning.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And again, it's just a day by day. Listen, there are times when when I can feel my innards, my insides stirring. Even doing this podcast, preparing for it, making preparation. Before I do the funeral tomorrow, there'll be a sense within me internally, but I'm not going to be frantic while I'm there.
Yeah.
So there are times when, it's not just. There are times when situations are beyond our control and that we feel frazzled, and we all experience those. I experience those, especially with immediate family members, especially. What is that? Okay, God, I don't like this. I'm not comfortable with this, but you're either with us or you're not. Either God's with us or he's not. Either he is the shepherd or he's not the shepherd. And I just have to keep going back to, okay, God, you're my shepherd. You're leading me, and I can trust you.
That's good. That's really good. I have to point out, and I don't know if you remember this, but I certainly do. And I know we talked a little bit about this when you and I ran to each other at camp this summer. But you once asked me a question during my own season of struggle and burnout, which was a few years ago. And I remember we were at a leader event, and you must have seen it in my eyes because you called me later that week and was just like, "Hey, I noticed something was up. What's going on?" And just kind of talked as graciously as you do through things. But the question that you asked me is, and we've even asked other people here on this podcast, is that what's a question that nobody seems to ask you and that you wish that they would? And I have taken that question and made it one of my own personal self-reflection questions that I will ask myself from time to time. And I can't give myself get myself off the hook by saying I don't know, because that's just not a helpful answer. And it's been really, really helpful for me to process and go, okay, what is it that maybe I need to go and be real with somebody else about? But I'm just curious, where did that question, or where did that come from for you to even know to ask that kind of a thing?
Yeah, what's the genesis of that? I think I try to be sensitive to what the Spirit is saying. I've asked God, help me to be very well aware of even the slightest breeze, the slightest movement. Help me to be available in that moment in time. I wrote it down somewhere. I think it's in Psalm 103, where it says that God made known his ways to Moses, his acts to the children of Israel. And I want to know God's ways. I just don't want to know his acts. I don't want to just see the things that God's doing. I really want to know what are you doing here? What is it that you're involved in here? And I don't mean necessarily in big picture, but with Chad in that moment that we had, and just remaining available to what you sense the Spirit is tugging on your heart, what you need to do. And sometimes you have to put yourself out there, and you have to ask the question. And it may not make sense to anybody. And I've learned to say, I'm okay if it was a question that no one answered and it didn't make a difference. But I've just learned through the years to try to be available to the Spirit, first of all,
yeah,
and to be available and present with that person in that moment. And I don't know if I saw anything in your eyes that day. I may not have. Who knows? I could have been the sunshine out that day. But I know this, because you have affirmed it, that the Spirit was there, and
yeah,
the Spirit has used that in your life, not just in that moment. And that's where it just says, God, I'm just going to be hopefully as true to you as I possibly can be. And it may not always make sense, the conversations we have with people. May not make sense to us, but that's what we sense the Lord speaking to us. And I'm willing to take that risk, ask those questions, or be present to someone in that moment. And I think we all do that to a degree. That's why we're in ministry. That's what brought us in the ministry. We wouldn't be in ministry if we didn't move when we were tugged upon to some degree, because ministry is not really something that we all seek out. It's something that seeks us out. At least that's my understanding. Yeah. So it's not like, let me get in line, I'm going to go do this thing. It's the Spirit that put a nudge in your heart and Brenton's heart, and to say, what about this? What about this? And he moves us, the God and the Spirit moves us along as we remain available.
So When I asked the question, then I think maybe you've answered some of this, but I'm curious if there's a little bit more, even from the practical standpoint. When I asked the question, how have you learned to do ministry without hating it? What is your response?
Well, there's aspects of ministry that we're asked to do that I don't like. So, for instance, last week I'm on call, work my regular shift. I'm on call till midnight that night. And I just get into bed about 10:45 and think, okay, they're not going to call me. And at 10:46, the phone, buzz goes off and says, hey, we need you at a nursing home 25 miles from the house. The patient just died, family's there. So, I'm like, oh, I just told my on-call triage nurse, I said, my bed just got warm. I have, so I was teasing with him. So, but just driving down there to 25 miles at, 11:30 at night, thinking, I'd rather be in bed going to sleep right now. So I don't like that. I don't like having to get up but I tell you, when I got down there to the nursing home, walked in, and to see the 4 adult children bedside with their dad, it had been a stressful relationship with their father through the years for a number of reasons. And to see those 4 warmly greet me, and they were so glad that I was there with them that moment in time. I wasn't there long. Maybe I was in the nursing home for maybe 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half hour until the funeral home came. But I knew when those 4 adult children walked out that door, they had a sacred moment together, and God allowed me to be a part of that to some degree, whatever degree, I don't know. And so, it's that realizing that this is really a sacred trust, whether it's hospice or pastoral care in the local congregation, or if it's you working at the local supermarket. If that's your ministry assignment, if that's where the Lord has you, you can look back at the end of the day or the end of the week and say, okay, God, there were some aspects I didn't like. There were some aspects I'd rather not have been faced with, but I was available to you, and you helped me in that moment. So are there things that I don't like about ministry? Yes, absolutely. Anytime the office sends out a new memo saying this is the new policy, it drives me crazy. And I always tell my coworkers, listen, remember this. The office is going to send out policies and make requests of you, but remember why we do what we do. We do what we do not because of the office policies that are sent our way, but we do because we do what happens at the bedside. So I said, you may be frustrated when you walk out of this administration office, but remember why you're here and those beautiful moments that you have with that person bedside. And for pastors and those who are shepherding local congregations, there may be frustrations with, church council or a planning committee or the color of the carpet, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the list can go on and on and on. But at the end of the day, remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing and the sacred trust God has given to you in this moment in time. We are stewards of what God has given to us. We don't own this. I don't own hospice or the patients. We don't own our congregations or the buildings. We are stewards for a moment in time. And I think that sometimes will help us to get through the rough patches in life. And there are rough patches. Listen, you have personalities involved. You're going to have personality. And that's reality. Again, you look at Scripture. Throughout Scripture, there's 2 people in a room. You have the potential for conflict, for frustration. That's reality. But the Spirit is there to help us in those moments. So,
wow, Jim, I just want to say thank you. Thank you, number one, for being you. I know I'm just, and Brenton would probably agree. We're just a couple of guys of countless leaders that I know that your humility, but also your availability and presence, as you've even talked about, and just obedience to what the Spirit is leading, has just truly made a gigantic impact. And so I want to say thank you. And I also want to say thank you just for taking the time to be here with us. I know for me, this was actually a very freeing conversation with a lot of some of my own anxieties about things. And I know it will be for many others. So once again, thank you so much.
Honored to be here with you, gentlemen, and thank you for the time and the privilege, really the privilege to be here. And I commend you for what you're doing. Continue on. You're really making a difference in so many lives. I know you have in mind, so thank you for that.
Well, thanks for joining us for this episode of Ministry Without Hating It. We hope it's helped you take a step further to loving what you do more through the wisdom of others. We want to again thank today's guest, Jim McGuire. Just a freeing conversation, I'm going to say, for me, and I hope it was for you, and I hope it's something that you were able to take and apply even where you're at right now within your ministry. If you'd like to connect further with Jim and find links to his book, Stay, we have made ways to do so available in the show's episode podcast notes. And as always, you can find more episodes and resources at withouthatingit.com. And don't forget to subscribe to Ministry Without Hating It wherever it is that you get your podcasts so you don't miss out on future episodes. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.